The dunes of Cape Cod are a place of wild, windswept beauty. They roll and crest like a frozen ocean, their golden grasses whispering in the salty air that blows in off the Atlantic. It's a landscape that feels both timeless and constantly changing, where the wind reshapes the very ground beneath your feet. People come here for the sun, for the roar of the waves, for a sense of peace that seems baked into the very sand. But beneath that serene surface, secrets can lie buried. Sometimes for a very long time. And sometimes the shifting sands decide to give one up. A secret that brings not peace but a profound and chilling disquiet. A story that would haunt this idyllic coastline for nearly half a century. It was the summer of 1974, a season of long, warm days and cool, starry nights. Families flocked to the Cape, their cars loaded with beach chairs and umbrellas, their minds on nothing more than vacation. The Race Point Dunes, a protected stretch of the Cape Cod National Seashore near Provincetown, were a popular spot for hikers and nature lovers. It was a place you went to escape, to feel the raw power of nature. But on a hot July day, that sense of escape would be shattered. Something dark had found its way into this place of light. A chilling secret hidden just beneath the surface of the sand was waiting to be found. Imagine a young girl, just a child really, walking her dog through that landscape. The sun is warm on her face. The sound of the surf is a constant rhythmic companion. It's a perfect summer day, an adventure. Her dog, however, is interested in something else. It pulls at the leash, its nose twitching, drawn to a particular spot off the beaten path. It starts digging frantically. The girl, perhaps annoyed at first, follows. What could possibly be so interesting? What could her dog have found in this endless expanse of sand and scrub pine? It was a discovery that would mark the beginning of a mystery, one that would puzzle investigators and capture the public imagination for decades. The thing that lay there, partially uncovered by the curious dog, was not a seashell or a piece of driftwood. It was something human, something terribly, tragically human. The discovery would send a shockwave through the tight-knit community. In a place known for its picture postcard perfection, a gruesome reality had been unearthed. The dunes, which had always seemed so pure and beautiful, now held a darker meaning. They had been a silent witness to a terrible act, and for almost 50 years they would hold the identity of the victim in their sandy embrace, guarding a story that no one yet knew how to tell. It was July the 26th, 1974, a Friday. The girl who found her was just 12 years old, out for a walk with her family's beagle. The dog, named Snoopy, suddenly veered off the path, its instincts pulling it toward a thicket of scrub pines. It began digging with a purpose that was impossible to ignore. The girl's father came over to see what the commotion was. At first it was just a smell, a terrible, unforgettable smell that didn't belong in the fresh sea air. Then he saw what the dog had uncovered. It was the body of a woman lying face down on a faded green beach blanket. The idyllic summer afternoon had just taken a very dark turn. The scene was immediately unsettling, even beyond the initial shock of finding a human body. The woman was naked. A blue bandana and a pair of Wrangler jeans had been folded neatly and placed under her head, almost like a makeshift pillow. It was a strange detail, an act that seemed almost considerate, yet it was completely at odds with the violence that was soon to be revealed. Police were called to this remote sandy spot, a place accessible only by foot or dune buggy. The investigation began right there, in the wind and the sand, with the Atlantic Ocean roaring just a few hundred yards away. A silent, indifferent witness to the whole affair. As investigators began their grim work, the full horror of the scene started to come into focus. This was not an accident. It was not a natural death. This was a murder, and a particularly brutal one at that. The woman had suffered a massive blow to the head, so forceful it had nearly decapitated her. The cause of death was clear, but the killer had not stopped there. They had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that this woman would remain a ghost, a nameless victim lost to time. It was a crime born of rage, but executed with a cold, calculated precision that was deeply disturbing to even the most seasoned officers on the scene. The location itself was a clue, or so they thought. The body was found about a mile east of the Race Point Ranger Station, a place not easily reached. Had she been killed here, or was this simply a dumping ground, a place the killer chose for its isolation? The sand around her was disturbed, but the shifting dunes were notorious for erasing tracks, for swallowing evidence. The killer had chosen their location well. They had used the wild, untamed nature of the Cape Cod dunes as an accomplice, hoping the wind and the sand would forever hide their crime and, more importantly, the identity of the woman they had so brutally silenced. When the medical examiner began the autopsy, the true depravity of the crime became chillingly clear. The killer's efforts to hide the woman's identity were as brutal as the act of murder itself. Her hands had been severed at the wrists, and they were nowhere to be found. This was a calculated move. No hands meant no fingerprints, one of the most reliable methods of identification available to law enforcement in the 1970s. The killer knew what they were doing. They were systematically erasing any trace of who this woman was, ensuring she would be just another Jane Doe, another unsolved case file gathering dust on a shelf. The violence didn't end with her hands. The killer had also attempted to remove her teeth. Several of her molars had been pulled out, a clear effort to thwart identification through dental records. It was a gruesome, painstaking act. Imagine the cold determination it would take to do that. To not only take a life, but to then meticulously try to scrub that person from existence. But the killer wasn't entirely successful. They had missed some teeth, leaving behind a clue, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Dentists noted that she had undergone some very expensive and distinctive dental work. New York-style crowns, they called it. It was a small lead, but a lead nonetheless. Her face, the very thing that gives us our identity, had also been a target. She was found lying face down, and the left side of her head, the side that had taken the fatal blow, was crushed. This, combined with the state of decomposition after an estimated 10 days to 3 weeks in the summer heat, made visual identification nearly impossible. All that was left was a description: a young woman, likely between 20 and 40 years old, with long, reddish-brown hair pulled back in a ponytail with a gold-flecked elastic band. She was about 5 feet 6 inches tall and had an athletic build, a ghost with a few faint features. From these few clues, investigators had to build a picture. They had to give a face to the faceless. Clay models were painstakingly sculpted by artists, trying to recreate what she might have looked like in life. These busts, based on her skull structure, were then photographed and distributed to the public. Sketches were drawn and redrawn over the years, updated as forensic art techniques improved. These images stared out from newspapers and television screens, a silent plea for recognition. But for decades, no one answered. The Lady of the Dunes, as she came to be known, remained a phantom, her story locked behind a face no one seemed to know. The investigation into the identity of the Lady of the Dunes began with a flurry of activity. Police chased down every lead, no matter how small. The distinctive dental work seemed like the most promising path. They sent her dental charts to clinics and dental schools all across the United States and even into Canada. Thousands of missing person reports were cross-referenced. Did any of them match the woman with the reddish-brown hair and the expensive dental crowns? The answer, time and time again, was no. It was as if she had simply appeared in the dunes, with no past, no family, no one looking for her. The few items found with her body were scrutinized endlessly. The faded green blanket, the blue bandana, the Wrangler jeans, were they hers, or did they belong to the killer? The jeans were a specific size, 36-inch waist, 34-inch inseam, far too large for her athletic frame. This suggested they might have belonged to her killer, a man. The bandana, a simple piece of cloth, offered little. These were common items, difficult to trace. The gold-flecked hair tie was a bit more unique, but it too led nowhere. Every object that should have told a story remained stubbornly silent, deepening the mystery instead of solving it. As the years turned into decades, the case grew cold. Investigators retired, taking the memory of the faceless woman with them. New detectives would pick up the file, read through the old reports, and feel the same sense of frustration as their predecessors. The Lady of the Dunes became a local legend, a ghost story told around campfires. Her body was buried in St. Peter's Cemetery in Provincetown in 1974, under a simple gravestone that read, "Unidentified female body found Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974. It was a stark, lonely marker for a life that had been so violently and completely erased. Exhumations were ordered not once but several times over the years, in 1980, 2000 and again in 2013. Each time there was a new hope, a new technology to try. The first exhumation was to see if anything had been missed. The later ones were for something that didn't even exist in 1974, DNA analysis. Scientists carefully extracted samples from her remains, hoping to build a genetic profile. This profile could then be compared against national databases, but still there were no matches. Her DNA was a dead end. The killer's efforts to erase her identity had been so successful that even the secrets held within her own cells couldn't name her. In the long silence that followed, theories began to fill the void. When facts are scarce, speculation rushes in. And the story of the Lady of the Dunes was, well, fertile ground for speculation. One of the most persistent theories revolved around organized crime. The brutality of the murder, the missing hands, the pulled teeth, it all felt like a professional hit, a message. Was she involved with the mob? Perhaps she was the girlfriend of a gangster, someone who knew too much and had to be silenced. Cape Cod, for all its charm, was not immune to the reach of infamous Boston mobsters like Whitey Bulger. The theory went something like this. The woman was connected to Bulger's notorious Winter Hill gang. Maybe she was an informant, or maybe she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Bulger was known for his ruthlessness and his habit of burying his victims in remote locations. The method of her murder, the overkill, the effort to prevent identification, certainly fit the profile of a mob execution. Investigators looked into known associates of Bulger and other criminals of that era. They chased down rumours and anonymous tips, but they could never find a concrete link. It was all just whispers, a ghost story without any proof to anchor it to reality. Another theory pointed to a different kind of killer altogether, a serial killer. Could the Lady of the Dunes have been a victim of someone who was passing through the area? A transient predator who left a trail of victims across the country? Law enforcement looked for similar unsolved murders, cases with the same, gruesome signatures. They considered notorious figures like Ted Bundy, who was active during that time, but again no connections could be made. The murder seemed to be an isolated event, a singular act of violence that didn't fit a broader pattern. She appeared to be the one and only victim of this particular killer. The years of dead ends took their toll. The case file grew thicker and thicker, filled with hundreds of leads that went nowhere. It was a source of deep frustration for the law enforcement community in Massachusetts. They had a victim, they had a murder scene, they had a cause of death. But they had no name, no suspect and no motive. The Lady of the Dunes remained stubbornly anonymous. She was a symbol of the perfect crime, a testament to a killer's chilling success in wiping a person off the face of the earth. The story became a cautionary tale, a dark spot on the sunny reputation of Cape Cod. Perhaps the most famous, and certainly the most unusual theory, came from an unlikely source, a Hollywood blockbuster. In the summer of 1974, the same summer The Lady of the Dunes was found, a film crew was on nearby Martha's Vineyard, shooting a movie that would terrify a generation of beachgoers. That movie was Jaws. The theory, which gained significant traction online, was first put forward by the author Joe Hill, who happens to be the son of horror master Stephen King. While watching the movie one day, he spotted an extra in the background of a scene, a woman who bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketches of the Lady of the Dunes. The scene in question is the town meeting sequence. As the camera pans across the concerned citizens of Amity Island, there she is. For just a fleeting moment, a woman in a blue bandana with reddish-brown hair. The resemblance was uncanny. Could it be her? The timeline fit. Martha's Vineyard is just a short ferry ride from Cape Cod. The movie was looking for local extras. It was plausible that a young woman visiting the area for the summer might have taken a day trip to be in a movie. It was a tantalizing possibility, a cinematic clue to a real-life murder mystery. This theory captured the public's imagination. It was a story that seemed almost too strange to be true, connecting a beloved piece of pop culture with a dark, unsolved crime. Internet sleuths dissected the film frame by frame. They compared the woman in the bandana to the forensic busts. The blue bandana she wore in the film was eerily similar to the one found folded under the victim's head. For a while, it seemed like this might be the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. Perhaps by identifying this extra, they could finally identify the victim. It was a long shot, but after decades of nothing, a long shot was better than no shot at all. Ultimately, however, the Jaws theory turned out to be just another dead end. In 2022, shortly after the victim was finally identified through other means, the lead investigator on the case officially debunked the rumor. He confirmed that the woman in the movie was not the victim, closing the book on that fascinating but incorrect chapter of the story. It remains a curious footnote, a reminder of how, in the absence of facts, we often look for patterns and connections, weaving narratives to make sense of the senseless. For a moment it seemed like a Hollywood movie held the key, but the real answer was waiting not on a film set, but in a science lab. While theories swirled and faded, science was marching forward slowly and quietly. The real breakthrough in the case of the Lady of the Dunes wouldn't come from a lucky guess or a cinematic clue. It would come from a field that was still in its infancy when she was murdered, forensic genealogy. This powerful new technique combines traditional DNA analysis with the vast publicly available databases of family history websites. It allows investigators to take an unknown DNA profile and search for relatives, building a family tree that can, with painstaking work, lead back to the identity of the unknown person. The process began with the DNA that had been extracted from the victim's remains during the 2013 exhumation. This genetic material, carefully preserved for years, was the key. Scientists created a detailed genetic profile and uploaded it to public genealogy databases. It was like casting a digital net into a sea of human history. They weren't looking for a direct match to the victim, but for anyone who shared a significant amount of DNA with her, a cousin, a nephew, a distant relative. The hope was that someone, somewhere, had submitted their own DNA for a family history project. and would provide the crucial link. The first hits came back. Distant cousins. It wasn't a direct answer, but it was a starting point. From there, the real work began. Forensic genealogists, acting like digital detectives, started building out family trees based on these distant relatives. It was a complex and time-consuming puzzle. They had to trace lineages back through generations, looking for a common ancestor, and then trace them forward again, trying to find a branch of the family that contained a woman who had disappeared in the early 1970s. It required immense skill, patience, and a deep understanding of genealogical records. Slowly but surely, the puzzle pieces started to fit together. They narrowed their search down to a particular family with roots in Tennessee. They identified a woman in that family who had been born in the 1930s and seemed to have vanished from public records around the time of the murder. They had a potential name. To confirm it, they needed a direct DNA comparison. Investigators tracked down a living relative of this woman, a child she had given up. They explained the situation and asked for a DNA sample. The sample was given, it was tested, and it was a match. After 48 long years, the ghost in the dunes finally had a name. On October 31st, 2022, Halloween of all days, the FBI made the announcement. The Lady of the Dunes was no longer a nameless victim. Her name was Ruth Marie Terry. She was 37 years old when she was killed. The news sent a ripple of shock and relief through everyone who had followed the case for so long. A name. It sounds so simple, but it changes everything. It transforms a cold case file into a human story. Ruth Marie Terry was no longer a clay bust or a composite sketch. She was a person who had lived, who had a family, who had a story. The details of her life began to emerge, painting a picture of a woman who had seen her share of hardship. Born in Tennessee in 1936, she was a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a mother. She had married and divorced. She had children whom she had lost touch with. Her life had taken her from Tennessee to other states like California and Michigan. In the months before her death, she had married a man named Guy Moldavin. They had been on a trip, a belated honeymoon of sorts, and had last been seen in the New England area around the summer of 1974. Then Ruth Marie Terry vanished. Her husband, Guy Moldavin, immediately became the prime suspect. He had a questionable past and had returned from their trip alone, telling Ruth's family that they had a fight and she had left him. He claimed he hadn't heard from her since. He later remarried. Moldavin had died in 2002, so he could never be questioned or charged with the crime, but the circumstantial evidence was strong. Investigators believe he is the one who killed Ruth and left her body in the dunes. The oversized jeans found under her head could very well have been his. It seemed the central who of the mystery had been solved, even if justice could never be served in a courtroom. Giving Ruth Marie Terry her name back was a monumental achievement for law enforcement and a profound moment for her surviving family. It provided a measure of closure, an end to the agonizing uncertainty. Her remains were returned to her family, and she could finally be laid to rest with the dignity she had been denied for so long. The simple, anonymous gravestone in Provincetown could now be replaced with one bearing her name. The town that had been the keeper of her tragic secret for nearly 5 decades could finally honor her as a person, not just as a mystery. Even with a name and a prime suspect, the story of Ruth Marie Terry is not entirely closed. A deep and profound silence still surrounds the heart of the matter. Why? Why was she killed in such a brutal fashion? If her husband was indeed the killer, what happened on that trip to turn a honeymoon into a homicide? Was it a sudden, violent argument that spiraled out of control? Or was it something more premeditated, more sinister? These are questions that Guy Moldavin took to his grave, leaving behind a permanent void in the narrative. We may know who she was, but we may never truly understand what happened to her in her final moments. The sheer brutality of the crime continues to haunt the case. The effort to erase her identity was extreme. Removing her hands, pulling her teeth, crushing her skull, these are not the actions of someone in a simple fit of rage. They speak to a cold, calculated desire to make someone disappear completely, to turn a human being into an unperson. Why go to such lengths? Was the killer trying to hide their own identity by hiding hers? Or was it an act of profound personal hatred, an attempt to obliterate the very memory of Ruth Marie Terry from the world? The violence seems to go beyond the act of murder itself, into something far more personal and disturbing. And so the mystery of the Lady of the Dunes endures, though it has changed its shape. It is no longer a question of who is she, but why her? The search for her name has been replaced by a search for understanding. Her story is a powerful reminder of how a person can be lost, not just to their family, but to history itself. For 48 years she was a ghost story, a local legend, a chilling piece of Cape Cod folklore. Now she is Ruth Marie Terry, a woman whose life was cut short, whose story was almost stolen from her forever. Her case stands as a testament to the tireless work of investigators who refuse to give up, and to the incredible power of science to uncover truths long thought buried. But it is also a somber reflection on violence, loss, and the nature of identity. The wind still blows across the Race Point dunes, the waves still crash on the shore, and the sand still shifts with the seasons. But now, when you look out at that wild, beautiful landscape, you might think of Ruth. Not as the faceless Lady of the Dunes, but as a woman who finally, after a lifetime of waiting in silence, got her name back.